Episode 1 of Yellowjackets begins with a young woman rushing through the woods, panicking. Crunching through the snow with bloodied footprints, she slips and lands in a hidden spike pit, which kills her instantly. We've got a real Lord of the Flies deal going on here, but before we dive into the craziness, we cut back to 1996 and see the girls before they crashed into this nightmare. The all-girls football, soccer team in New Jersey, the Yellowjackets, is our main focus. Specifically, the college girls who happen to be part of this team. Interspersed around nightmarish scenes on the island, we cut to different characters during our present-day timeline off the island. These women have been through quite the ordeal, and seeing how each of these women are suffering works perfectly to keep things suitably intriguing, especially as we've yet to see how crazy things get. Jackie is the proverbial queen bee, while the various worker drones include Natalie, Shauna and Ellie. There's a beautifully foreshadowed moment too when the coach brings Jackie into his office, telling her that as the captain she needs to rally the team around her when things get hard. The first test comes from freshman Ellie, who seems to choke under pressure. Tysa meets with a few of the other girls, deciding to freeze her out and force Ellie to up her game. Natalie, who's there to witness the girls trying to enact their tough love, is completely against this and walks away. On the pitch, a crunching slide tackle sees Allie's bone sticking straight out her skin. The girls are shocked, torn over whether this was intentional or not. Jackie does her best to rally the girls, eventually having them all line up and say one nice thing to each other. Jackie goes first and honestly, this scene is brilliant. Not only does it feel natural, it also brings out a lot of exposition to help understand who these characters are and what their defining trait is. Carefree Natalie, faith-loving Laura, determined and tenacious Tysa, straight-talking Lottie and of course Shauna, Jackie's best friend. In the morning, all our characters hop aboard their private jet to the upcoming game. They've got a long flight ahead of them and all our girls get settled in. Now, in the present, Shauna meets Tysa and reminds her what they agreed to. They're to stay quiet, not talk to the press and keep what happened on the island a secret. Another who made it back is Misty, who works as a carer, and she's clearly mentally unhinged. She takes away the meds for her patient and has a menacing scar while she does it too. As Misty leaves work, she's watched from afar as Natalie grabs a hunting rifle and begins stalking her prey. It's here we cut back to the island one more time as we see the plane crash land in the middle of the forest. Episode 2 of Yellowjackets begins in 1992 with a flashback featuring Misty. She receives a call from several students at school who berate her, antagonizing the girl about doing anal, and ending the call by calling her a weirdo. Fast forward to our plane crash, and out of all the girls, Misty is the first one up off her seat. She acts like a leader, helping to move everyone off the plane. Fire rages in the back, threatening to engulf the whole plane, as all our girls make it out. Coach Scott is trapped under the wing of the plane, while the pilot is a bloody mess in the destroyed cockpit. While most of the girls are cut and bruised, Misty quickly gets into the swing of things, setting a tourniquet on Coach Scott's leg after literally cutting it off with an axe. While the others are shocked, it's enough to force Misty to convince the others to follow her lead. She's taken the Red Cross babysitting class twice, and off the back of this, is able to help organize the girls into patching up those who need help. Back in the present, Misty ends up on a blind date with a guy called Stan. Things don't go to plan, but she guilt trips him into heading up to her apartment that night. Only, Nat happens to be there, holding a gun and waiting. She has a postcard too, complete with a strange insignia on the back, which she believes Misty can decipher. As fate would have it, Misty actually received one of her own too. The pair head out to the bar together, where Nat deduces that this is a threat against them both. Among Misty's belongings, though, is a photocopy of an ID for a guy called Travis. When Nat sees it, she decides to go after him next. Now, Travis happens to be one of the boys with them on the plane when it crashed. It's here we cut back to the forest and see what Travis has to do with all of this. It turns out his dad is one of the coaches who happens to be up a tree, impaled on one of the branches. He's still alive, but not for long. The branch collapses under his weight and comes crashing down to the floor with a sickening thud. On the tree branch, though, happens to be the same insignia that Tysa received on her postcard in another present-day sequence. Ty is going through her own problems though, ending up in a fight with her wife back home. Her son, Sammy, is going through the motions and clearly knows more than he's letting on. He reveals that he doesn't like reading anymore, but seems to have drawn strange figures pinned up on the wall of his bedroom. Apparently there's a lady in the tree that watches him at night, hence why the glass is covered. It's certainly unnerving, and clearly hinting at something much bigger in the works here. Shauna's marriage is also on the rocks, as she attends couples therapy and realizes they're both completely empty. They're not having sex, and between Shauna and her husband's jobs, they've been too busy to give it much thought. Their therapist suggests they're all a play, but things take an awful turn when they attempt that. So bad, in fact, that he decides to go off on his own and masturbate. This situation is made that much more complicated by Adam, the guy Shauna rear-ended in an accident earlier in the episode. He flirts with her a little when he rings, suggesting she doesn't play by the rules. When she refuses to engage, she instead slips back into primal instincts, killing a rabbit and preparing it for dinner. Given Shauna's time in the forest, this comes naturally to her. And it also allows her creative juices to begin flowing, role-playing with her husband again that night, but a lot more creatively. Unfortunately, after their session, she checks his phone and finds a message from someone called Bianca, telling him to meet at their usual spot at 4 p.m. It would appear that he's cheating on her. Back in the forest, the girls all sit around the campfire, talking about their darkest secrets. There's some pretty funny stories here, including one about Bruce Willis's penis, but when the attention turns to Shauna, she's silent. That's definitely suspicious, but a scream from the woods interrupts them all. It's Misty. She takes a burning axe and cauterizes the wound for Coach's severed leg. In the middle of the night, Misty heads off and finds the flight recorder, blinking with a red light. Instead of sharing with the others, she smashes it up completely, making sure they can't. Episode 3 of Yellowjackets begins back in the forest. All our kids gather together and mourn the deceased. Laura leads the charge, with all the girls gathered and saying their goodbyes to those who have fallen. Among those include both pilots. Ty is the one who's hit hardest by this though, reminded of moments in her past. She's no stranger to death, or religion for that matter, as she was there when her grandmother passed. Now, we do see more of this later in the episode as her grandmother rants and raves about a man with no eyes in the mirror. She's scared, and that in turn makes a young Tysa see the same ghostly face in the mirror, witnessing this terrifying omen. When Ty checks her eyes at the funeral, it seems the old lady's predictions were true, they're just white. Anyway, back in the forest it has been 3 days, and there has been no rescue yet. After destroying the flight recorder, it's safe to say that help won't be arriving for a while. Tysa comes bounding through the woods, excitedly chirping about a lake she's found. Given they only have 2 days' worth of water left, this seems like a logical place to move all their gear to. After a tactical vote, they all agree to leave. On the way, a severed carcass and strange growls in the distance seem to hint that a wolf are stalking the group. This would also fit with last episode's visions of a wolf Tasha saw in Sammy's room. Anyway, they do eventually make it to the lake and begin to let loose a little. While swimming, some of the kids notice reflective flashes in the sun. Halfway up the hill in the distance, something is glittering. The gang follow the light and find an abandoned hut. There's canned food there, but it's not exactly edible, while Jackie sports a nasty cut on the side of her thigh. Trouble brews between Javi and Travis too, who wind up wrestling out by the hut, arguing about their father. Back in the present, shots are thrown at Tasha as her campaign dealt a blow by a smear ad by her opposition, Phil. Sammy interrupts though, as Ty takes him out to the park. There, Ty receives a call from her team. They found some incriminating details about Phil's life, which she decides to use as collateral against him. However, Sammy ends up hitting another child in the face, breathing heavily. From the wild look in his eyes, Sammy looks possessed. Elsewhere, Shauna tries to find the best way to broach the subject of her husband's cheating. Specifically, she brings up 4 p.m. to see if he mentions Bianca. He doesn't, of course, and claims he's swamped at the store. This only causes more alarm bells to ring for Shauna. So naturally she follows him to a hotel, which seems to confirm the worst. In order to catch him red-handed, she follows him in, trying to learn what room he's in. Adam shows up, though, and the pair end up talking once more. Shauna admits she's trying to figure out if her husband is unfaithful, and that soon comes to fruition when she notices him talking to Bianca and walking past. Out on their road trip, Nat and Misty make it to a convenience store. There, she finds the severed wires from the flight recorder in her glove compartment. "I knew it," she says through gritted teeth. Nat stays quiet for now as the pair make it up to Travis's place. They haven't seen him for 25 years, and after breaking into his house, Nat finds his old clothes. Now, it's clear that the pair had something going on in the past, and a Polaroid of the two together only reinforces that. Checking his gear, Nat realizes he's been working at Willowbrook Ranch. They don't get much further than that though, as a sheriff sees them breaking and entering, and hastily arrests the pair. With Nat's call to Tysa a bust, Misty phones Kevin and manages to talk her way out of trouble. Back on the road again, the pair arrive at Willowbrook Ranch. When they get there, the duo find Travis has hung himself. Nat is adamant he was murdered. A note in his apartment seems to confirm this too, reading tell Nat she was. Episode 4 of Yellowjackets begins back on the plane, this time with our focus shifting across to Natalie. She sees her alcohol father in the seat next to her, claiming it's been waiting for us. This, as it turns out, happens to be a dream, but when she awakens in the cabin, Lottie is sitting up and staring at the corner. She's convinced that something bad has happened at the hut. In the morning, the kids all decide to start using guns to try and hunt for food. Of course, because Coach is down to one leg, it falls to one of the kids to pick up the weapon and become the new hunter. Given we've seen Nat with a hunting rifle already, any guesses over who comes out on top? Yep, obviously it's Nat, so the tension sorta stagnates here. Although to be fair, there is a nice moment where Nat antagonizes Travis, prompting him to turn a gun on her. It's enough to motivate Nat to hit the cans lined up on an overturned log, one after another, which soon silences Travis. The kids also find a plane in the forest too, which appears to still work, but is also stuck and tangled up in the vines. Lottie is convinced that forces are at work keeping them in the forest. Interestingly, Javi winds up growing closer to Shauna, as it seems to me that Adam is actually Javi in this present-day timeline. Speaking of which, in the present Shauna is glowing after hooking up with Adam the night before. As she applies her makeup, she clearly can't help but think about their lovemaking. In the present, Natalie receives a checkup call from Misty. Following Travis rocking up dead, Misty tries to calm her, but Nat remains determined to find out who killed him. She also wants to work alone too, blowing off Misty's attempts to work together. Instead, Nat hangs out with Kevin, letting him know about Travis passing away. What she wasn't banking on, though, was Misty watching the two from afar, texting Nat to let her know Jessica is nearby. Nat is not happy when she finds out, telling Misty to leave her alone and go home. Instead, Misty approaches Jessica and tells her to leave. She also confirms that she's a dangerous woman and really shouldn't cross her. Jessica is amused, but refuses to budge on the matter. Instead, she visits her mum, who's living in squalor, with clutter everywhere, watching the TV, and with an oxygen mask. There's certainly no love lost between them, given some of the trying times they shared in the past. One of which happens to involve Kevin, Nat's best friend, who was run out the house by her father. In a fit of rage, Nat actually grabbed a gun and threatened her father. When he snatched it from her, an accident results in him shooting himself in the head. Back in the present, Tysa attends a party, but she struggles to hold it together. When the subject of her time in the wilderness is brought up and what she did to survive, Tysa winds up seeing the white wolf once again, lurking about in the shadows of this house. It doesn't take long for her to be approached by Diane, the political donor. She tries to coerce Ty into confessing her dark secrets from the forest. Realizing what she's doing, Ty instead tells Diane to, in no uncertain terms, go fuck yourself. Now, one of the other characters here who has had a rough time of it is Natalie. She winds up kissing Kevin on the lips after their meeting during the present, but back in the forest, it's Travis she ends up romantically linked with. After helping him get a ring off Coach Martinez's hand, cutting his finger off after digging up the grave, the pair talk about how bad their fathers are, which is something the pair both have in common. Meanwhile, Shauna and Adam decide to get a little crazy, stripping off and jumping in the water from the bridge above. Just before they jump, Shauna winds up seeing Jackie's ghost, telling her that someone is going to get hurt. That night, Misty rings Shauna and lets her know that Travis is dead. When she hears the news, her face drops completely. Misty, though, smugly hangs up as the episode comes to a Episode 5 of Yellowjackets begins back in the forest. The girls keep themselves entertained, dancing to This Is How We Do It. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your reaction to this scene, the batteries run out. Creaking from above serves up a delicious tease that these girls may not be alone. In the morning, Nat wakes up Jackie, who's cramping. Well, so are the rest of the girls too, as it turns out their periods have all cinched up. As she walks out the cabin, Jackie is immediately told to pull her weight and get more water. Only, Lottie happens to be in the lake already. It's pretty unnerving, but Jackie doesn't pay much attention to it, beyond asking if the water is cold. The thing is, out in the wilderness Jackie isn't a leader. In fact, she's been doing a pretty terrible job of bringing these women together. We've seen Misty step up, and in the wake of that, Jackie has slipped into the shadows. She's not chipping in, and Shauna notices. She tries to help Jackie out, warning her best friend that the others are noticing her laziness. There's bound to be a mutiny if she doesn't start pulling her weight. Shauna has her own problems though, given she's not had her period yet. Instead, she uses blood from one of the carcasses to hide the truth. That, as we find out later in the episode, is that Shauna is pregnant. However, Shauna has bigger problems right now. She's torn between the hive mind and Jackie. For now she's loyal to Jackie, agreeing to her idea of a seance to communicate with the dead. That night, Lottie appears to be possessed, muttering in French that he always wants blood as their game takes a turn for the worse. Lottie smashes her face against the wall, bleeding out, while Coach winds up vomiting downstairs. This doesn't appear to be linked to the seance though, as the tea Misty gave him looks to be spiked. When Coach questions her about it, we find out that he does have feelings for her after all. However, he wants to keep it a secret so the other girls don't get jealous. In the present, Shauna and Jeff continue to suffer problems in their marriage. Of course, that brings Shauna and Adam closer together, attending a masquerade party that night. As fate would have it, she runs into her daughter, Callie. She's wearing Jackie's cheerleading outfit, and that immediately winds up Shauna. Jackie is the big elephant in the room here though, as we learn that Jeff and Shauna never talk about her. The next day, after a seemingly heartfelt conversation with her daughter, Callie decides to blackmail Shauna. Callie gets no curfew in exchange for keeping her secrets. Only, Shauna hits back, playing her own game and pointing out that divorce lawyers are expensive. And Callie's college funds will be used to pay them. It's clever, and her scathing assessment of Jeff's spiraling life knocks some serious sense into the girl. Meanwhile, Kevin rings Nat and lets her know that the toxicology report on Travis is clean. After hanging up, she reluctantly rings Misty. Nat calls on her expertise to hack into Travis's files and see if anything is hidden. After antagonizing Misty's contact with petrol and a lighter, they receive the police files. With Misty's help, they check the crime photos and notice a smudge that seems to be wax. Putting all the pictures together, the girls find another of those strange symbols that are etched on the trees in the forest. Given Travis never believed in the cult stuff, it backs up the theory that he was killed. Elsewhere, Tice's polls aren't looking good. She's down by 20 points in the suburbs, and her angry reaction to Diane last episode isn't doing her any favors. That stress manifests once more in seeing a wolf out in the street and ominous red paint on the door reading spill. The culprit is actually Sammy, who has red paint under his bed. He also claims that the lady in the tree made him do it. Whether this is a red herring or a genuine bite of foreshadowing is one of the better inclusions in this show. Early in the morning, Tysa decides to fight back against Phil, giving a rousing speech about fighting back. She even blames the red paint on someone else other than Sammy. Nat eventually brings Ty to her place and shows her the crime photos. As they ring Shauna and learn that Misty has already informed her and broken their trust, we pan out to see Misty is actually keeping an eye on Nat, courtesy of bugging her camera. Is she the real ringleader? Episode 6 of Yellowjackets Season 1 begins with a closer look at Lottie, and boy is this girl weird. As a child she begins screaming while waiting at a red light, avoiding a car crash. However, this perceived premonition is rejected by her father though, who decides she needs to go to therapy. Back in the wilderness, Lottie continues to experience weird visions. This time of a deer with bloodied antlers. Now, this is an ominous foreshadowed sign of what occurs at the end of the episode, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. During one of their late-night rendezvous, Ty wants to leave the group, but Van convinces her not to. When she heads back in the cabin, Shauna awakens after another nightmare. It's here we find out that Shauna's baby is actually fathered by Jeff, who's currently dating Jackie. Oof. Shauna's worried about Jackie finding out and contemplates taking drastic measures to hide this. The guilt though is overbearing. That reaches fever pitch, though when Jackie talks to Shauna about Jeff. After gushing over how good a boyfriend he is, she reveals that he actually told her he loved her the day before they left. Speaking of loving, Nat and Travis wind up kissing passionately inside the wreckage of the plane. When they head back to the cabin, most of the girls ooh and ah over their newfound relations. Jackie, though, is not happy. She calls them out for a lack of effort on the hunting front, bubbling up the tensions in camp. I mean, this is the same Jackie that hasn't been pulling her weight. Anyone else smell a new world order on the horizon? Anyway, Lottie's earlier vision with the deer sees her head up to see Laura. Now, as she's the spiritual rock on the island, it makes sense that Lottie going to her for advice on what this means. If you accept him into your heart, he'll help you discern the true from the false. Lottie takes her down to the lake and carries out a makeshift baptism of sorts, gently dropping her into the water. In doing so, she once again sees that same vision of the deer. As she lights a couple of candles, she flashes back to the present, where Laura believes she's seen the Holy Spirit. Meanwhile, Travis asks the one question that every single guy seems to ask, and it always ends up in tears. He asks how many guys she's been with. Nat immediately takes offense and begins lashing out until she finds out that Travis is actually a virgin. Nat though isn't, but honestly, who cares, right? She convinces Travis it doesn't matter, but rustling outside distracts them both. It's an animal, and the perfect opportunity to hunt presents itself. It's a deer, and as the pair bring it into camp, Lottie notices it has bloody antlers, the same deer from her visions. When they cut open the deer, maggots are crawling all over. It's the final straw for Ty, who takes the initiative and decides to try and find some help. Our time in the present picks up with Shauna. She makes it over to Natalie's place, where Tysa steers the conversation to Travis and the weird symbol. Interestingly, Shauna never actually received one of the envelopes. Now, Nat believes it could be Jessica, but instead of bringing her over, Shauna comes up with a counter plan. She wants to throw a tracker in the bag of $50K for whomever this blackmailer is, that way they can find who it is and where they're going. Now, if Shauna's issues on the island were racked with guilt, so too is her time in the present. We're on the anniversary of Jackie's death, and everything is a reminder of the betrayal she engaged in. All of this crescendos with Jeff admitting that he and Shauna were having an affair behind Jackie's back. Meanwhile, Ty takes Sammy to a therapist who confirms that there's definitely something going on with him. It could well be overwhelming stress, but Ty scoffs at the idea. Now, while Kevin and Nat grow closer together, hooking up at the hotel, Misty continues to act incredibly shady. She rings the reporter, Jessica, while surrounded by pills and her laptop screen showing the camera feed from Nat's hotel room, and organizes a meet later that night. As they talk, Misty taunts the reporter, telling her that her plan isn't working. In reply, Jessica scoffs and retorts, "My plan? Remember those pills?" Well, Misty has concocted a particularly nasty knockout juice which she uses in a syringe to knock Jessica out that evening. She takes Jessica over to her apartment, ties her up to a bed in the basement, and wishes her a good night. As the episode closes out, we finally get some answers over who the woman in the tree is that Sammy has been seeing. It's Ty. She awakens with a bloodied hand, that same strange sigil from before, and a confused panicked reaction over what's going on. She's also up in the tree too. Her phone rings with Nat telling her to meet, as the unknown blackmailer organizes a meet for 2 a.m. It's Episode 7 of Yellowjackets begins with Tysa cleaning her hands rigorously, washing off all the mud. She also bandages her wrist after a particularly nasty cut. Glancing over, she receives another message from an impatient Nat telling her to hurry up. Tysa does eventually show, at around the same time as Shauna. They have the tracker but not sure whereabouts to hide it. The measly $50K is a little sparse in this large bag, so they decide to fill it with a whole manner of random trinkets, including an empty crisp packet which they decide to place it in. Nat decides she's the one who's going to make the drop, telling the others to meet a couple of blocks over. After dumping the bag in the charity donation bins, the trio all gather and ring together, waiting for their blackmailer to show. The gear is moved, but unfortunately Nat blows their cover and jumps in too early, cornering the truck driver. A foot chase soon ensues when the real culprit steals the bag from the back, rushing through a department store. Just as he's about to drive off, Nat sees red and contemplates shooting him dead. The others stop her, with the bullet ricocheting off the pavement, but apparently she wasn't trying to kill him. Nat is more forthcoming with her feelings than the others in the aftermath of this. She's quick to point that out to the others, referencing how she wears her emotions on her sleeve. Shauna and Ty are both going through their own messed up problems, and as Nat so eloquently puts it, they're just better at hiding it. Misty eventually confronts Jessica down in the basement. Taking off her gag, she claims that Jessica killed Travis and is the one responsible for blackmailing and stalking them all. She chuckles at this incredulously and reveals the truth. Ty is the one who actually hired her to keep an eye on all the other survivors. She wanted to make sure no one else talked and messed up her campaign by spilling the beans about what they endured in the wilderness. Jessica also confirms that Travis was murdered, but she refuses to disclose how she knows unless Misty lets her go, using this nugget of info as leverage. She even suggests they team up together. Unfortunately, Misty is a complete psycho and refuses to be swayed, determined to make the reporter talk, even if it's doing so through torturous means. Thankfully, it doesn't get that far. Jessica eventually does reveal that Travis's bank account was closed right after he died. This means that someone other than him emptied his account. She deduces that whoever killed him also has that money. Back in the wilderness, the group gather together to try and figure out what to do next. Tysa is determined not to wait for winter and a lack of food. She's going to hunt for civilization. She's not allowed to take the gun though, but Jackie does cave and allows her to take a flare gun instead. Just before she leaves, Ty cuts her locks and sports a brand new haircut. In private, Van decides to go with her. She feels compelled to at least try to find salvation, calling Ty their fearless leader. Ty's bold decision also inspires several other girls and Travis, although he's convinced to stay by Nat. When Travis and Nat do finally get some time alone though, he has trouble performing. He's scared, and as he starts to get uncomfortable and anxious, the whole sexually charged encounter falls flat. Eventually Travis leaves flustered, apologizing timidly. Lottie approaches Van just before the group leaves, telling her about her dreams. She's seen visions of red smoke and a river of blood. Lottie eventually gives her a big hug and wishes her well. With this ominously hanging over them, the final group to head off compromises of last-minute Misty, who gives Coach a big hug in a very awkward moment, Mary, Akilla, Ty and Van. Wolf howls that night are an ominous foreshadowed glimpse of what's to come. They're also motifs we've seen across Ty's flashbacks in the present. Ty's group do eventually come across the Red River, just as Lottie foretold. Even worse, their compass begins to spiral out of control. Ty wants to press on, but Van isn't sure, claiming that the woods don't want them to leave. Ty grows impatient and instead decides they should use the sun as a guide instead, reminding them that they're losing daylight and need to continue forward. That night, the camp come under attack from wolves. Van is ravaged by a wolf, which Ty sees in all its horrific detail. She watches as her lover is dragged into the woods. She fires the flare gun and eventually beats the wolf to a bloody pulp before it can. Van meanwhile is left very much dead, with a gnarly chunk taken clean off her face. With the group fractured, Jackie decides to confront Shauna about what she's hiding. She knows her best friend is keeping secrets, and Shauna does eventually spill the truth, revealing that she's pregnant. She lies though, claiming Randy knocked her up. She also claims it happened the night of Mary's birthday party. But there's a problem with that story. That's the exact night that Jackie went back to give Randy a lift home, causing her to doubt the whole story. Sensing this, Shauna hides her journal, but later that night Jackie finds it. Reading the passages out in the woods, she can hardly hide her emotion as she reads about Shauna's dark truth. Episode 8 of Yellowjackets begins back in the woods. Torchlight dances over Ty's face as she prepares to burn Van's body. Only, Van is actually still alive. The kids scramble to save her from the fire, eventually heading back to the cabin. Van is in a rough way, and with a bandaged face and a limp leg, her life hangs in the balance. Through some brief flashbacks, we learn a little more about Laura's ties to religion. As a child she dived into the swimming pool and smacked her head. A thin dribble of blood oozes out her open wound. Close to drowning, she's saved by a lifeguard wearing a gold cross. Looking up at him, the lifeguard smiles and tells her it's the Lord who saved her. From this moment on, it appears Laura turned to God for guidance. Still in the wilderness, Natalie catches up with Coach and talks about his connection with Misty. She's not stupid and realizes this is all a big show. Given he doesn't look at any of the girls, she realizes that he's actually gay. She promises to keep this a secret, but is also worried that Travis may be gay too, especially after he failed to perform. Coach reassures her that this isn't the case. Down by the lake, Travis ends up talking to Jackie, who spills the news about Nat sleeping with Bobby Farley. This is enough for him to think differently of Nat, and after confronting her back at the cabin, he ends their lust-fueled fling. Of course, with Jackie lurking in the distance, Nat realizes that she's to blame. Eventually Van arrives back at the cabin, where her muffled cries pierce the air. This is enough for Laura to set to work putting her plan into action. After studying the flight manual for the past 2 weeks, and knowing the gas tank is full, she's going to fly the plane south and get help. Given Van needs serious medical attention, Jackie suddenly speaks up and forces Shauna to tell the others she's pregnant. There's some definite hostility growing her, and some of that stems from Jackie's meddling in personal issues. Then again, knowing who Shauna has been sleeping with gives her an incentive to ruffle some serious feathers. Everything here looks like it's going to blow up in a big way. In the present, Callie confronts Shauna about her affair with Adam. Shauna hits back, pointing out that Jeff has been doing inventory for way too long and is just as much to blame. Only, Callie brings up a bigger problem here. She can't find any trace of Adam online. Callie implores her to be careful, pointing out that he could be a conman wanting to sell a story about the Yellowjackets. So naturally, Shauna does some research and realizes Callie may be right. She's interrupted by Jeff though, who shows up with some clothes for her. They've got their reunion coming up, and he wants her to look the best. That night at dinner, Tysa shows up. Heading out with Shauna, Ty admits she's been having some problems. Between sleepwalking and Biscuit the dog going missing, which she believes she's responsible for, she's losing control. With Callie out, Shauna encourages her to stay the night, where the pair discuss Shauna's affair and Ty not feeling it with Simone anymore. In the morning, Shauna heads over and confronts Adam, determined to know more about his past. When he admits to lying about school, he promises everything else he's told her is real. He even invites her out to a weekend break at a cabin in the woods, where he promises to tell her everything. Although Shauna buys his story, later on in the episode she starts to have her doubts. They say love is blind, lust is blind, but it takes finding flakes of glitter in the closet, the one Adam was hiding in, to begin suspecting the most outwardly suspicious man in this show may actually be suspicious. Meanwhile, Misty hurries over to Nat's house when she notices her about to score some coke. $300 worth to be precise. As they talk, Nat finds the hidden camera and questions what Misty is doing. Misty points out how they're friends, and friends look out for one another. Nat, though, doesn't see it this way, and forces her out. Nat continues to spiral, even blackmailing a face from the past who she used to run with. This is Susie, a former sponsor from rehab whom she assaulted a decade earlier. Nat has some pretty juicy leverage over her though, given she used to sell customer data to fuel her habit, and with this knowledge, forces Susie to find out who took money out of Travis's account. The attention soon turns back to the wilderness, as we finish off this episode. Laura Lee manages to fly the plane. At least to begin with anyway. While in the air, a fire sparks up, eventually leading to the whole plane. Episode 9 of Yellowjackets begins with Shauna confronting Adam, demanding to know who he is. She calls him out for blackmail, demanding her missing journals back. The code for the safe was actually the flight number 2, something that Shauna immediately points out when she finds a whole stack of books about Flight 2525 in his drawer. Shauna immediately grabs a knife. As flashes of the past bleed through, Shauna is entranced, refusing to listen to Adam's pleas. She stabs him with that knife, watching as he bleeds out on the floor. When Shauna heads home, she asks Jeff about the glitter in the closet. Hands on hips, he shakes his head before finally admitting that he's responsible. His actions link back to the store. He's being run out of business from his competitors, so he decided to blackmail the other Yellowjackets. Specifically, he wanted to go after Tysa, determined to rustle up enough cash to try and pay for the store and prevent it going under. Even worse, Jeff took out a loan from loan sharks. He's paid them back, apparently, but the store is still in jeopardy. It's here Shauna opens up and admits that she stabbed Adam. Originally she thought he was blackmailing her, and calls out his affair with Bianca. Only, it turns out Jeff wasn't having an affair. Bianca was the name of the loan shark he had to pay back. He was never actually having an affair, which leaves Shauna shocked and reeling when Jeff is incredulous to her confession. As they contemplate their choices, Jeff decides to go to the cops and take the blame for stabbing Adam. Shauna reminds Jeff that this goes deeper than that. The blackmail would eventually get out, and even worse, his best friend, Randy, actually knows about what happened to the Yellowjackets too. If this incriminating news broke out, it would cause devastation for their relationship. Secrets have defined their relationship this whole time, and now, it seems like the only way to salvage what they have is to embrace it. Jeff decides they should let the other girls believe that Adam was the blackmailer. Back in the wilderness, Jackie's doom and gloom attitude eventually leads to the girls all agreeing to party, at least as a way of trying to stave off the incoming hunger and disaster they're going to endure. Jackie is convinced they're all going to die anyway, and decides they should celebrate DOOMCOMING, their own variation of homecoming. They even have some fermented berries that may have turned into alcohol too. Alone in the woods, Jackie continues to dance around the truth. She knows what happened with Shauna, and decides to try and win over Travis, which will almost certainly cause drama with Nat. Gosh, I wouldn't want to compete with you over a boy, Shauna, Jackie says to her friend, but the implications here goes right over Shauna's head. What else goes unnoticed is Misty sneaking off into the woods, picking up mushrooms she's had stashed away and leaving them, wrapped in a cloth, next to the kettle INSTEAD1. When she leaves them unattended, the others find them. You've been holding out on us. Misty can only smile thinly as it seems she had other ideas for this. The DOOMCOMING soon gets underway, and everyone shows up dressed to impress. Ty stands by Van's side, making makeshift masks for them both, so they fit in together. Misty watches as everyone starts to eat the food, quite clearly laced with mushrooms. Lottie organizes a silent tribute to Laura, eventually humming while staring at the dancing flames in the campfire. The rest of the girls all start joining in and singing too, which leads to them all dancing together. In the wake of all this, Jackie asks Travis to dance, which obviously riles up Nat. So naturally she takes Coach away so they can drink together. When they leave, Jackie tries it on with Travis inside. Travis rejects her and asks about Natalie, eventually admitting that he's in love with her. This is the final straw for Jackie, who admits outright to Travis what happened between Jeff and Shauna. Her pain is enough for Travis to begin kissing her. It's unclear whether this is solely out of pity, but when Jackie mentions feelings like a shell of the person she once was, this is what sparks him into action. With the mushrooms taking full effect, the girls all decide to check on Jackie and Travis. However, en route they hear wolves in the distance and decide to start howling back at them. They immediately enter the room, but Travis is under the influence of mushrooms and not thinking straight. The girls turn on Jackie and lock her in the storage room. As they do, they all turn their attention to Travis and begin kissing him. It's pretty uncomfortable stuff and Travis eventually runs away from them. In the woods, Misty finds out Coach Ben is gay and immediately spirals, while Natalie hurries back to the cabin where she finds Jackie calling for help in the locked room. After letting him out, the cries from the girls echo through the woods as they chase Travis. With Lottie in control, she stuffs a pine cone in Travis's mouth and leaves it to Shauna to cut the head off this guy. Shauna, though, sees a stag in his place. Thankfully, Natalie and Jackie both show up just in time to save him. Back in the present, Jeff sits down and talks to Shauna about her traumatic experiences in the wild. He's known this entire time what happened between them, and even through the affair and all the hardships they've had together, Jeff still wants to support her and be by her side. After this chat, Shauna rings Ty, who in turn rings Nat. She mentions finding the blackmailer, as she decides to press ahead with her original story about Adam being the blackmailer. Eventually Nat and Ty show up, with Shauna showing off the planted bag and concocting a story about the pair having a scuffle. She also shows her journals from the woods, pretending Adam stole them from her. The thing is, Nat has contacts, and she's still waiting for the bank teller to confirm more about the fund transfer. This will almost certainly materialize in the coming chapters. Unsure what else to do, Nat has an idea to call on Misty to help them move the body and clean up the crime scene. The thing is, Jessica has a way of manipulating her, and despite being chained up, convinces Misty to open up and admit the truth about what happened out in the woods. At least in view of the whole public anyway. Nat shows up at her door and throws a spanner in the works though. She apologizes before getting straight to the point. She wants her help in moving Adam's body. Episode 10 of Yellowjackets begins with the girls waking up in the wilderness, having recovered from their eventful mushroom fuel night. Nat shows up to see Travis, who's obviously still spooked from the night's events, but claims that he's fine. The thing is, camp is very much not fine. The situation with the shrooms is spilled, as everyone learns that Misty drugged them all. However, rustling out from the trees brings a brown bear to the cabin. Lottie, though, is not scared, and while the others back away, she holds a knife and stalks toward it. As it drops next to her, Lottie proceeds to stab it, killing the large creature outright. There's enough food here to feed the whole group. An hour's earlier prediction about them coming into food very soon eerily rings true. Meanwhile, Van has been through quite the ordeal, and she speaks to Ty in confidence. She believes she was between places when she was near death. Van is obviously in shock, and Ty tries to incredulously laugh it off. For Van, though, she vehemently believes what she saw, and upon hearing how spook her lover is, Ty throws her arms around Van and promises that everything will be okay. Misty's alibi and moving the body? In the present, Misty grabs her gear from the care home, being sure to wave goodbye to the other workers on the way out. This is simply to give herself a solid alibi for moving her gear around. She's agreed to Nat's deal, but with specific terms to their agreement that include her attending the reunion later on in the episode. Misty soon shows up at Adam's apartment, unnervingly jovial and happy. She implores them to listen to her as she goes through how to move this body and cover up the murder, although Shauna is quick to dissuade the use of that word. First up, everyone is to switch off their phones, with Shauna tasked with cutting up the body into pieces. Nat agrees to help her with this, while Misty and Ty are on clean-up duties. While Nat and Shauna get to work chopping Adam's body up, they both discuss what they're all going through. Shauna admits that sometimes she sees the world through the lens of darkness and theorizes that perhaps Travis really did kill himself after all. I mean, given what these women have had to deal with, it's not outside the realm of possibility. Interestingly, Shauna also tells Nat that she needs to forgive Travis too. Misty's morbid plan here involves cutting all the limbs off, but being sure to separate the head and hands from the torso. Misty volunteers herself for sorting that, giving herself an alibi and a front. Earlier in the episode she mentioned how Gloria, the woman she was looking after, has passed away. So naturally, Misty shows up at her funeral, but stashing Adam's head and hands inside the coffin, just before Gloria is burned and cremated. It's a genius cover story in truth, but it remains to be seen if they get away with it or not. The reunion party? Meanwhile, Jeff waits for Shauna patiently at the 25-year reunion. Out of all the people to show, it's Ally, the girl who broke her leg and couldn't make the plane that day. She questions Shauna's resolve, but Jeff is adamant that she'll show up. And show up she does. After disposing of the body, Ty and Shauna both arrive at the reunion together with Nat. It's here that Nat finally starts to come around to the idea that Travis may well have killed himself after all. At the same time, Shauna confronts Randy and promises to kill him if he opens up and says anything about the blackmail. Midway through the party, Ally jumps on the microphone and shows off a big montage video for the Yellowjackets. As it centers on Jackie's picture, Ally encourages Jeff and Shauna to get up and dance, right under the shadow of Jackie's face. She claims it's what she would have wanted. The thing is, it's definitely not. What happened between Jackie and Shauna? After killing the bear, everything that's been boiling up spills over into a messy fight. When Jackie refuses to give thanks for the bear's sacrifice, despite everyone else doing so, she outs Shauna and her cheating to the whole group. Shauna hits back though and lashes out at Jackie, telling her she feels sorry for her best friend and the perceived perfect life she has. Shauna calls her weak and outs her to the whole group, claiming high school is the best she's ever going to get. With the girls rallying around her, Jackie grabs her stuff and leaves. With Jackie trying to survive on her own, Javi goes missing. Travis heads out into the woods and tries to find him, but refuses Nat's help when she shows up. He simply tells her to leave. She doesn't though, and eventually it knocks down his walls, and Travis admits that he loves her. As they embrace one another, we cut back to the present to see Nat cleaning up her apartment and throwing away the pictures of Travis. As she does, Nat sits on the bed with her gun, contemplating her own future. What happens to Jessica? Back in the present, Misty heads down to see Jessica. She's unsure whether she can trust her, but Jessica manages to convince her. She calls herself a fixer, pointing out how she cleans up the mess of the rich. This certainly resonates with Misty, who lets her go, or does she? As Jessica drives away, she puffs on the cigarettes Misty suggests she give up. The thing is, Misty has drugged her again, this time lacing the cancer sticks with fentanyl. As she drives onto the curb, she passes out. Who wins the election? With Ty spending the evening with her team, the election results are called in. The race happens to be much closer than anyone expected. However, as everyone sits around waiting anxiously, Adam's face flashes up alongside a missing person report. Ordinarily that would be fine, but for the fact Callie knows about Adam and happens to be on the sofa with Jeff at the time. And she certainly looks worried as Shauna heads in with a bowl of popcorn and doesn't even bat an eyelid to the news. The election itself sees Tysa win, beating out Phil in a stunning upset. As she sees the news come in, she smiles. What's going on with Ty? At Ty's house, Simone heads in to collect up her stuff to take to Sammy. Heading down into the basement, she finds blood droplets by the vent. She also finds a strange pedestal with a heart, their family dog's head, Sammy's toy and that same strange sigil up on the wall. That's important, but we'll explain why later on in this recap. What happens to Jackie? Is she really dead? The ending to Yellowjackets is absolutely insane, and there are several shocks back-to-back that really gives us a peek under the hood of the mechanics behind this series and what's really going on. First, Jackie freezes to death outside the cabin after being banished from the others. With everyone snug inside and sleeping, Jackie is left alone. However, in a vision from Jackie's perspective, we see her encouraged to come inside the cabin by Shauna, or who she believes to be Shauna anyway. Inside, she sees a whole group of people, including many of the deceased, and a shadowy figure who looks a little bit like Jeff. Or at least the older version of Jeff anyway. "We've been waiting for you," he says ominously. Who are the cultists? Is there anyone else alive from the wild? In the present, Nat looks like she's about to commit suicide. She has the gun to her jaw and is about to pull the trigger when suddenly a whole rabble of people burst into her apartment. One of them, a man in a gray hooded jacket, has a weird necklace on that has the same symbol that we've been seeing all over the place. The same symbol, I may add, that we saw in Ty's basement. Now, it would appear that Ty is part of all of this and potentially calling on this cult's help to secure the election result too. Anyway, Ty is not the real ringleader behind all of this. As Nat is taken away, kicking and screaming, we learn that the money transfer was actually enacted by Lottie Matthews. Yep, she's still alive, and it appears she has a whole cult of worshippers outside too. This brings Travis's perceived suicide into perspective, with it becoming increasingly likely that these cultists actually killed Travis. The final shot of the season shows Lottie in the snow-covered wild, kneeling before the remnants of a tree trunk, dropping a bare heart and requesting the powers that be to let the darkness run free. It appears we've got some serious voodoo mojo to contend with going forward. This season has been crazy good fun, though, and there's the right balance of teen drama, mystery and fantasy in this puzzle box to make it an enticing small screen prospect. It's one of the rare mystery shows that seems to have come out of nowhere and absolutely knocked it out the park. Sure, there are some plot contrivances here and there, along with a couple of plot holes. How on earth has Van recovered so quickly? But there's a lot to like here, making for a really enjoyable watch. Season 2 looks set to be absolutely crazy, and we are all for it.